Hello War of the Visions fans, I'm Jackie Fox, and if you're new here, welcome to the channel. I've noticed that as a lot of the bigger War of the Visions content creators have stopped making content for the game, that more and more new and returning players are seeking out my channel as a first refuge to get their updated information about what the game is like now, because especially over the last year, the meta has changed. So if you are a returning player, or if you're a brand new player, there are some concepts that you should probably brush up on that there aren't a lot of people talking about, and without new player-centric channels, there really isn't an opportunity for you to get this information. So for the first topic that I'm going to be covering this week, and I'll cover more if you'll just let me know what you're thinking about in the comments. If I see any themes showing up in the comments, then I'll explain those topics this week as well. But I'm going to start with faith and curse. Now I have to start with faith first because curse is a status effect, and status effects are very greatly affected by both units' faith that are in the equation. If you know nothing else about faith from Final Fantasy Tactics or anything else like that, you might know that it is, unlike I think every other stat in the game, a double-edged sword, in that it does three things. Technically, maybe you could think of it as like 5 things or even 6 things. But it does good things and bad things at the same time. And it's going to depend on the type of character that you're playing, how high you actually want your faith to be. So the first easy rule of thumb is that for mages, you're generally going to want 97 faith, and we'll talk about reasons why you might want it a little bit lower, but there aren't many characters that actually qualify for this. So first rule of thumb here is mages are going to be 97 faith units. And what is this going to do for them? Well, it's going to mean a couple of things. Their magic damage, both casted and received, is going to be increased. So for magic damage dealer characters especially, they want to be at 97 faith so that they can do their most damage. Sure, this will make them a little worse into other mages, but those mages will also be worse to them. It's a shared disadvantage, so it's not as bad. It's not something you usually consider with mages. And often there's some tech in mages kits that can give them anti-magic capabilities, or at least give them ways to deal with higher faith units. And there's a lot of recent mages that have teched into status as a way of potentially dealing with other mages, because that's the second thing that faith is going to increase. It's going to increase your chances of landing statuses on others, and others' chances of landing statuses on you. This brings us to our second rule of thumb for physical units, because there are a number of effects in the game that are positive that do work on this kind of faith system. So it's not just status effects, but there are at least 2 status effects I can think of that are conditional and that can fail if you have lower than 50 faith. So you want to have 50 faith as a minimum, and the effects that can fail if you have lower faith than this are things like regen or haste, but also any skill other than re-raise that brings you back to life. So raise or full life, even full life, which usually doesn't fail, usually because it's casted by a character with 97 faith, that helps it land more often. But if you're casting this on a character that has lower than 50 faith, then there starts to become more of a failure rate for it. And this is especially true for raise. Using raise on physical characters is usually a really bad deal, because you're very unlikely to actually bring them back to life. It's more often a dead turn than anything else. And there are older characters that have full life, like say Liarte, who aren't going to be as good at using it, but it is still a pretty cool skill for her, especially because being the unit that she is, there's not a lot else that she's going to do. And with long-range status in her kit, because she doesn't have damage, because she is a very low-cost unit, it might be worth running her at a really high faith just to help her land stuff like Charm or Immobilize or any of her other statuses in her kit, but also increase the likelihood that her full life will actually revive a character. But for physical units, since they aren't doing magic damage, they want to reduce the magic damage that they take as much as possible. but you could go as low as 30, and maybe there are some characters that would be into this in certain compositions, but technically any character can have another character put haste on them, or can have another character put regen on them. Even if it's not in their kit, it could be in your team, and this is going to lead to some awkward situations if your faith is lower than this point. So as a general rule of thumb with my physical characters, I like to start them at 50 faith and kind of build up from there. So what are the instances where you want to build up from there? If you have a physical unit that is good at inflicting statuses, sure, they are going to become a little bit more likely of catching statuses, but if they're mainly doing them to other people, good example of this coming up is Agrius, who is going to have like 3 or 4 status effects in her kit. You know, one of them being Stop, I think Disable's in there too, maybe Confusion. All of these are really debilitating, so even though Agrius is meant to be more of a magic tank, you might want to run her with higher faith so that her statuses land more often on mages, and just deal with the fact that you're going to take a little bit of extra damage for playing the game this way, and also deal with the fact that other status units might have a little bit better chance into Agrius because of this. So for Agrius specifically though, she also has a lot of self-healing in her kit, at least with her upgrade. And this is going to be the type of character that might even go up as high as 80 faith, because both the self-healing in their kit is something that's going to be happening on multiple turns, multiple casts. It's something really consistent that they will be doing very often, but it's also that, like, she doesn't do a lot of damage, and really her status effects are where she's going to be relevant, other than her ability to tank and distract other people. So you really want her statuses to land, and you really want her to be able to heal herself well. You can probably deal with the fact that she's going to have a little bit more trouble with status effects. She is going to be getting resistance to Curse, which is going to be really helpful for her, so that's at least one status effect you won't have to worry about as much with her. So maybe for a character like this, you might want to run them as high as like 80 faith. And there are a number of characters that are like this. Another good example might be Tifa from Advent Children. She both has HP draining skills, and she has the ability to frostbite multiple characters, which can be pretty impactful in defanging opposing physical teams especially. So for a character like Tifa of Advent Children, you might want to run as high as maybe 80 faith. I still don't necessarily recommend going all the way up to 97 for these characters, because they still don't have the magic damage, you know? I feel like that is maybe one of the more important things here, but, you know, it's definitely going to help them with healing, and it's definitely going to help them with getting their statuses off. So there's a bunch of characters like this that are physical, that have good status and have good healing. Maybe another good example of this would be Veritas of the Flames. He doesn't have nearly as much status in his kit, it's not nearly as integral, and he is a damage dealing unit, so he has other ways of being impactful in battle. But he is also a character that basically most of his kit allows him to restore HP, so you really want him to be able to restore HP well, but he does also have AoE Paralyze, which can be impactful, so there is a reason to raise his faith for the healing, for sure. I would say you might even raise this up to like 15 points, because he's really a character that's going to be healing every turn, and maybe even in between turns using his counter skills. So that, I would say, would get him up to maybe 65. And then, you know, when you think about that Paralyze too, maybe that could run him up to 70, 72, 74, something like that. And it's not an exact science necessarily, because if you change these numbers by 5 or by 10, sure, it is going to change all the things that we've talked about before, but only a little bit. It's not going to be a huge effect. Really, one of the biggest impacts that you're going to see from faith isn't going to be from 50 to 60 or 60 to 70. It's actually going to be going below 50, and that's why I set that as a baseline. So as long as you're between 50 and 97, most characters are going to work all right, and most physical characters are going to want to be closer to 50. But given that a lot of characters are self-healing, and a lot of characters now have a lot more capability with statuses, there is definitely reasons to be running physical characters as high as 80 faith, perhaps. And I also want to talk about how healing power up works, because it works basically the same way that faith does. So follow me on this. This is how the calculation works for a heal. you have both calculations for the healing power and the faith as modifiers for the person casting the spell. So if you are casting a spell on someone else, your healing power and your faith are going to modify how much they're healed. But the target's faith and healing power is also going to affect this. So it could be modified even further if you're healing a high faith unit with high healing power. Those two things would compound. But if you're healing yourself, and this is a special case, your faith and healing power get used in the equation twice. So if you're a self-healing character, you want high healing power and you want high faith, because if you have both of those things, you're getting essentially a double effect anytime you heal yourself. And this is especially relevant for a lot of those physical characters, because a lot of mages are more likely to heal themselves and others, or heal others and stay on the back row. But physical characters are a lot more likely to heal themselves, which means that some of these factors really come in heavily to play for them. A good example of this, one of the first early examples of this that really encouraged people to run high healing power, or to run a physical unit with higher faith, and I think with his Limit Burst upgrade, he actually, maybe you could run him even higher faith. He is already really bad against magic. It's only going to make that matchup worse, honestly. But it's going to make him better into certain things. It's going to give him an opportunity to AoE stun people, which might just keep him from taking that magic damage. And the character I'm talking about here is Snow, if you haven't picked up on it yet, because he was one of the first characters with the HP threshold heal, and this was for like about 50% of his health, right? So if he has, say, 12k health, this is going to be a 6k heal. But if he has higher faith, you might be able to get this up to like a 7k heal. And if you have really high healing power, because that's doubled, just like faith is, because that's doubled in this equation, he's also going to heal maybe even up to 10k or higher. I've seen this guy get really, really high with his healing on his self-healing skills because of the way that faith and healing power stack into this equation. Now that we've gotten a little bit nerdy about the faith stat, I hope you understand a little bit better how you might assign faith to your characters, because we have over 200 characters in the game, and I know I've only given a couple of examples, but I think with these rules of thumb you can kind of figure out exactly how much faith your characters need. And remember, when I say exactly, this is like give or take 5 or maybe even 10. If you want to run a character that's physical at 90 faith, I don't think that's a great idea, but it's not going to be that big of a difference from an 80 faith character, and hey, maybe it helps you land statuses or something like that. Maybe that works out for you. But I think a lot of the I think, like, for a long time, physical characters just weren't doing enough healing, self-healing especially, and status. They just weren't good at it. There weren't a lot of reasons to run them with above 50 faith. There were definitely people who've done it all throughout this game. There have been faith all over the place for certain physical units, and you know, there have been times when there are characters that I would now consider to be closer to 50 faith characters that I would have run with higher faith just to increase the chance of one of their skills landing, because it gave me a beneficial interaction. One example of this, I think, like, maybe within early year 2 of this game, was running King Mont, because Black-Robed Helena, the original UR Helena, was like the biggest deal in the meta, and Mont had enough range that he could potentially disable her on certain maps if he could hit her before she hit him, and he had just enough bulk that he could maybe survive one of her hits before he did it. But if he could land that disable on her, she was out of the game and you could probably win. You've just disabled the most impactful character in the entire game, and definitely the most impactful character in the match. So I think there was maybe a time when I was running Mont at 80 faith himself, and at that time, he had no self-healing skills. He had no, he has a threshold heal now, and maybe he makes a little bit more sense as like a 72 faith or maybe higher character. Or maybe a little bit lower to 70. I wouldn't say he's an 80 faith character now, even with the threshold heal, but, disable can be impactful. And if you're really playing into a certain matchup, or maybe there's a certain map where you realize that you're going to get that hit first a lot of times on a particular character, maybe it is worth running it a little bit higher. But, I guess my point here is that faith is a hyper situational stat, and hopefully I've given you the tools to be able to think about it so that you can figure out what those situations are and how to apply it for yourself. But if you want maybe another example for a character I'm definitely going to be talking about in the next video, actually a couple characters I'll talk about in the next video, both One-Wing Sephiroth and Astrolancer Ramada, they're both curse units. Curse is probably the most impactful status ailment in the game at this moment. It just does a whole lot. There aren't a lot of characters that have it. There aren't a lot of teams that use it necessarily. And yet, at the same time, it's everywhere. Or at least curse resistance or curse is everywhere. These are the teams and these are the units that are really kind of dominating the meta right now. And to varying degrees, One-Wing Sephiroth and Ramada both have that status in their kit, and they both have self-healing in their kit. Now, Ramada has HP Absorb, which I think is when you give them the full 15 points for self-healing, because they're going to be doing it multiple turns in the fight. So, she's at 65 already. And she might even go up to 75 or 80 because she can curse multiple times in a fight as well. So you really want those to be able to land. For Sephiroth, though, I think you go a little bit lower because he only has that one cast of Curse. He does have Berserk in his kit as well, which could also be pretty good. But just because all of his kit isn't about healing and all of his kit isn't about status in the same way that Ramada is going to get multiple chances to heal and multiple chances to curse, you could probably get away with running Sephiroth at 62, 65 faith or something like that. Although, you may be thinking, well, if he only gets one chance to curse, I've got to make the most of it, so maybe even run him at 80. And you know what? That's probably not the worst idea, but I would say if you run either of these characters at 80, Ramada is going to get a lot more out of it. Because, if we're talking about guild battle here, he's only going to be using curse in one of those fights. Again, he might be able to berserk someone in the second fight, but, this is a pretty good chance that he's not going to be using that status in the same way that Ramada is going to be. So I would say out of the two characters, I would want to run Ramada at a lot higher faith, and Sephiroth definitely has enough going for him in his kit that I would run him above 50 and probably even above 60, but I don't know how much above 60, you know what I mean? So there it is. Those are my tips and guidelines for how to assign faith to your characters. I hope you learned a lot from this video, and I hope you stick around for the next ones. If you're a newer returning player, definitely check out the new players playlist. Maybe that'll refresh some stuff for you. I'll be putting these videos on that playlist as well. So with all that being said, remember to like and subscribe. Also ring that bell so you don't miss any content. Check out that playlist. Leave a comment. Tell me what you're thinking about for other topics for these videos. I wouldn't really do one per day, so get on this comment so that I can see it and make the video before the end of the week. And with all that being said, remember to click the link in the description to see all the corners of the Jackie Fox Media universe. If you just want to hear my voice more, there's a podcast, there's another YouTube channel. If you like my words more specifically, I do write books, so you can read either fantasy, science fiction, or kind of near past cyberpunk. I write all of those in one of my books, the near past cyberpunk set in the early pandemic. It Even Happens While We Sleep is available for $15 in hardback, which is a pretty good discount on the price. And I really love the art on this one. I think it looks so cool. It would look really cool in like the background of people's YouTube videos. I should use it more in the background of mine as well. I don't have that like typical YouTube commentator like fucking bookcase behind my desk setup, but if you do, it's a cool book to show off, and so check that out. Buy some for yourself, for your friends, help support the channel. Like and subscribe, ring the bell, comment, you know the things. And with all that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.